Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much for the invitation in organizing this interesting conference. I'm going to talk about conflict, the connection between conflict and corruption. To do that, first I will have to talk about the Cyprus conflict itself, very briefly. And then, I just realized that I copy-paste. When I was copying and pasting, I made a mistake. So there are two sites in Cyprus. One of them is the de facto state where I come from, TRNC. The other one is the internationally recognized Republic of Cyprus. So separately, I'll look into the corruption figures. So in that respect, I'm going to be, my presentation will be similar with yours. So I'm glad you prepared the audience for that. And then I'm going to compare the results on both sides, and I'll add very brief concluding remarks at the end. So let me say a few more things about myself, my background. I'm a political scientist, and I wrote my PhD on political clientelism and patronage in the Turkish Cypriot society. So I'm focusing on the Turkish Cypriot society. Patronage or political clientelism can be seen as a special form of corruption, political corruption. So in the last 5 years, I turned my attention to corruption in a broader sense. I've co-authored 6 to 7, it's 6 to 7, meaning the 7th one is in the pipeline. We have the figures, and I'm now writing the report. I'm co-authoring this along with a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, and we are using Transparency International's methodology. Why? Well, Transparency International is not doing it for the Turkish Cypriot society because we are not recognized, we are not part of the international community. So we said, why don't we do it ourselves using this methodology? And this gives us a clear advantage. It has upsides, let's say. One is nobody is asking us where these questions are coming from. So why are you bothering us with these corruption questions? And the second, and as important, I would say, is that it gives us the opportunity to compare with the rest of the world and with the Greek Cypriots, Turkey, Malta, etc. So similar societies. So 7 fieldworks, let's say, 5 of them with business leaders and some experts following the methodology of Transparency International. And also we conducted 2 fieldworks with 1,000 ordinary citizens. So I'll be, the figures that I'll be quoting come from our own research. The Greek Cypriot figures come from Transparency International. And as I said, I've been working on corruption, political clientelism in the Turkish Cypriot society, but I started to think about the connection between corruption and the conflict or continuation of the conflict when I got this invitation and I started to think about that. So it's pretty much work in progress, and I would appreciate your feedback here. So as I said, very briefly, let me say a few things about Cyprus conflict. We are there, we are neighbors, only 45 minutes, even less flight. So Cyprus has been troubled by conflict between the 2 main communities, Greek and Turkish Cypriots. The population ratio is like 20 to 80%. Following the breakdown of the constitutional order in 1963. The conflict itself, you can trace it back to the mid-1950s. Then we have this short period of peace where we had this partnership state, Republic of Cyprus, which didn't really survive beyond 3 years. It is, I'll come back to that, but it's really important to bear in mind a few things about this republic. It was a consociational democracy or a functional federation, meaning we had quotas. Somebody talked about Lebanon at some point, saying that they have these quotas for everything. Okay, it was less complicated for our case. In our case, because we had only 2 communities, but there was this strict quotas. So it didn't work. It collapsed only after 3 years, and well, I mean, there are 2 scenarios or 2 interpretations here. When you ask it to the Turkish Cypriots, the discourse is they kicked us out. When you ask the Greek Cypriots, they say they stepped out, so they left on their own. But there's a crucial United Nations Security Council resolution here, which essentially affirmed that there was only one government in Cyprus, and that was the now solely Greek Cypriot controlled government of Cyprus. So there is a legitimate, internationally recognized government of Republic of Cyprus, and Turkish Cypriots who were seen in this scenario as in a way rebels. And the same resolution also deployed United Nations peacekeeping forces in the island in 1964. So this low-intensity civil war lasted until 1974. This is important to take a look, because before many people are used to this, the map on the right. When Turkish Cypriots living in the north, Greek Cypriots living in the south, but this was not the case until 1974. So both communities were scattered around. So 74, the war in 74, again, depending on where you come from, you can call it an invasion, you can call it a peace operation. So at the end, we have this, let's say, a de facto ethnic partition of the division of the 2 communities. This is actually important in the sense that, well, let me give you some figures as well. Some 150,000 Greek Cypriots left the northern part of the island. Some 50,000 Turkish Cypriots left the southern part of the island. So as of 1974, there was plenty of housing, shops, you name it, to distribute after 74. And this is part of the story when it comes to corruption in the northern part of the island. I'll come back to that. So what's going on since then? Well, the 2 sides have been trying to reunify the island, at least officially, through intercommunal negotiations under the auspices of the UN. By 77, only 3 years after the war, these talks have led to the conclusion of the so-called high-level agreements where a federal solution of the conflict had been agreed. So this bizonal, bicommunal federal model has become a UN parameter. And actually in 2004, we came to the brink of reunification. We had the referendum for the reunification plan. It didn't work out at the end, but maybe I can add that as well. Since 2003, it's possible to cross between the 2 sides. Until 2003, this was not possible. We were completely isolated from each other. Now, there are 7 or 8 crossing points. We have to show our IDs, but beyond that, we can cross and interact. The latest round of negotiations collapsed in 2017. This is important because after that, the official Turkish Cypriot position has changed from federation to 2-state solution. 2-state solution basically means Greek Cypriots recognizing the entity in the north. It's basically a no-go. Okay? But I'll come to that again. Please keep that in mind. I'm saying this for a reason. So why doesn't it? Why can't we resolve this problem? Okay? My friends Konstantinos Adamides and Kostas Konstantinou have they coined this comfortable conflict thing. It's a comfortable conflict. They say nowadays the Cypriot conflict is more symbolic, as a certain kind of peace is also in place. That is, absence of violence combined with democracy, partial freedom of movement between the two sides, and enviable levels of prosperity, both north and south of the UN buffer zone. Well, the Greek Cypriots are more prosperous, they are more democratic, but overall we can say that their conclusion here is right. Okay? There is this, again, they call it illiberal, not liberal, but illiberal peace. So let me elaborate on this a little bit more. And here comes into picture my corruption argument. I argue that corruption is making the resolution of the Cyprus problem more difficult because there are vested interests in both sides of the island which benefit from the existing situation. In the south, the absence of Turkish Cypriots in the government mechanism means more power and less accountability for the president. Within the EU, there is only one country which has a presidential system, and that's Cyprus. A presidential system is considered as less democratic. Let's say the best example is the US, and we saw what happened even in the US, where you have these strong checks and balances when Trump came to power. So that's one thing. In the north, it's easier to explain the situation because being a non-recognized de facto state means we are not part of the international community, we are not bound by international regulations. So let me say, just to consolidate what I said about the presidential system in the Republic of Cyprus. In the Republic of Cyprus, there are less checks and balances now because the system set up in 1959 envisaged a delicate power sharing mechanism between the two communities. Functional federation, consociational system, whatever you call it. It was designed in such a way that the Turkish Cypriot vice president would counterbalance the Greek Cypriot president. So the Turkish Cypriot president, okay, thank you. Turkish Cypriot vice president had the veto power, and they had to make all the appointments together. And there was also a House of Representatives where Turkish Cypriots were also represented. So there was, and even one interesting detail, there was a Supreme Court where there were 3 judges, one Turkish Cypriot, one Greek Cypriot, the third one was independent. It was the first one was from Germany, for instance. So they're all gone now. So this is one of the experts on Cyprus, James Karen Lindsay. It's a quote: Unlike other presidential systems such as the US, the president of Cyprus faces few constitutional checks and balances. It might be even more appropriate to describe the system as an elective absolute monarchy. Such is the strength of the presidency. In fact, the sheer strength of the office is perhaps best emphasized by the fact that the greatest protection against the abuse of presidential power and authority rests not with the Constitution, but lies with the president himself. So I'll show you in a minute how this works in practice. So going back to the north, well, for one thing, being outside the international system, as I said earlier, provides a petri dish for illicit activities. I talked about distribution of the Greek Cypriot property. Of course, you can do it one way and you can do it the other way. You can be sure I studied that in my PhD. It was used to reward the loyalists and and also punish those who were critical of the government. So there are many casinos. They were there since the beginning, but since 1997, casinos in Turkey are closed. So most Turkish casinos moved their operations to the northern part of Cyprus. So it's not only the Turkish Cypriot businesses, it's about also Turkish capital is also involved. And already in the 1990s, before they moved the casinos to the north, the northern Cyprus was described as the Sicily of Turkey. It can be argued that Cyprus conflict made the Turkish Cypriot community more corrupt in other senses as well. Let me explain this also. And I think this is also a very interesting detail about TRNC as a de facto state. Since 1974, the Turkish Cypriot community, as well as the political class, has been divided along the lines of pro-reunification and pro-status quo powers. So there are people, and they have even become dominant in the period between 2002 and 2020, I would say, people who are in favor of a federal settlement, I mean, reunifying with the parent state. You don't see that when you look at Kosovo. Well, Kosovo is more or less like a state now, but you don't see it in Transnistria, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh, when they are divided and they don't want to go back to the parent state. So we have this in the northern part of Cyprus, and that's why Turkish governments, I mean Turkey, Ankara, which bankrolls the entire system, they are not big fans, at least in this in a very big period, very long period of time, almost 30 years. They didn't want these pro-reunification people to come to power. So, at all costs, they kept the pro-reunification forces out of the government. And here comes, and this is a perfect recipe for corruption, because we know it from the comparative politics literature that if a party stays in power for a very long time, it means corruption is inevitable. So I have this quote, it's in the internet, it says it's from Mark Twain. It turns out that it's not from Mark Twain, but I think it's still cool. Rulers ought to be changed routinely like diapers for the same reason. So we didn't change them for a very long time, and the result is the same. So let me speed up a little bit. So as I said, Transparency International is not covering the TRNC. So we are covering that using their methodology, and we can clearly see that the Turkish. This is the score out of 100. 0 is super corrupt, 100 is super clean. Countries like Denmark, New Zealand, I mean other Nordic countries, they are pushing 90, and the war-torn countries like Afghanistan, etc., they are at 10s. The world average for the last 10 years is 43. The EU average is 65. So as Turkish Cypriots, we have a clear decline. I'm not going to talk about that. Maybe if there's any question or in the social part, I can talk about that. But the situation is not good, to say the least. There is a clear decline in the south as well. Okay? So let me elaborate on that a little bit more. And this is something which I realized thanks to this conference, actually, because I always thought, about this, simply this, and say, well, we are more corrupt. Hey, they are corrupt, but we're definitely more corrupt than the South. But when you scratch the surface a little bit, you see some similarities as well. Let me come to that. Most of you have heard about Al Jazeera's how Al Jazeera exposed the golden passport scheme of the Republic. So I'm not going to get into details of that, but one MP and the Speaker of the House resigned after that, after the scandal, and they finished the scheme. Okay? And let's come back to the president. Remember this elected absolute monarch. Okay? And Anastasiadis is not the first Greek Cypriot president who was involved in these allegations. Before him, Tassos Papadopoulos, who was also a lawyer, was involved in laundering money from ex-Yugoslavia, etc. So this is to say again, the presidents of the republic are very, very powerful, not so accountable. Okay? And you can always use this national cause, whatever thing, whenever things go, whenever you get criticism from the others. But this is something that I would like to highlight. A quote again. Paraskos is was a chief editor, one of the most seasoned journalists in the South. He wrote in an opinion piece that President Anastasiadis, who officially advocated for the unification of the island, of the divided island under a federal system, confided to him that he was actually considering a two-state solution, under normal circumstances, absolute no-go. In order to keep money flowing to a law firm he transferred to his daughters when he became president. The figure he mentioned was 300 million euros. Okay? Golden passports. I mean, his daughter's company, a law firm, is doing most of them, or let's say not most, if not most, but many of them. And I remember hearing from journalists, Greek Cypriot journalists, that the son-in-law is running also a property firm and car dealership. I mean, super luxury car dealership, because this is part of the scheme. Okay? You have to invest minimum 2.5 million euros to get the golden passport. So, I mean, this Al Jazeera thing is fantastic. I watched it once again last night. It's worth watching. So, coming back to the comparison and seeing the similarities. As I said, Transparency International has two different studies. One is based on the responses of the business community and the experts, the other ordinary citizens. So there is this huge difference when you ask the question to the experts and the business executives. When you ask a different set of questions to the ordinary people, you see that Cyprus performs either the worst, it's the worst performer among the EU countries, or in the bottom three. And figures are very similar. So when you ask people whether corruption is a big problem in the country, 88%, if I'm not mistaken, of the Cypriots, of the Greek Cypriots said, yes, it is a very big problem. And this is what we did and found out. Exactly the same figure in the north as well. Government's performance, Cyprus again, it's the worst. So 80% say they're not doing well. The Turkish Cypriot one is slightly worse. In our case, 86% say they're not doing a good job. And also, when you say government is pretty much run by a few big interests looking out for themselves, do you agree or disagree? Well, what's the figure? 68%, exactly the same figure in the two communities. So they both communities believe that their their governments are run by private interests. So one last thing, when you fear of retaliation for reporting corruption, the Greek Cypriot case is even worse. I was surprised to see that they are more afraid to report corruption than Turkish Cypriots. So, to wrap up, there are different dynamics at work, but the existence of the conflict is making both communities more corrupt, and these corruption networks are undermining the efforts to solve the Cyprus problem. After all, a unified Cyprus would mean more accountability for politicians and businesses on both sides of the divide. So why ruin the running system with peace and that kind of romantic stuff? Thank you very much. I hope I was on time.